Content warning. This episode contains discussions about domestic violence. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is affected, please seek support from local resources or helplines. An-Nisa's helpline is 832-324-9111. You are not alone.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Chatter That Matters. Today, we're so lucky to have with us a special guest, Thecia Jenkins. Thecia is the training director with Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, a nonprofit that coordinates system response to domestic violence to increase victim safety, hold batterers accountable, and prevent further acts of violence. So, since this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we are so lucky to have Thecia. She has been developing curricula and training professionals in law enforcement, healthcare, education, and social services on the topics of domestic and sexual violence, emotional intelligence, and trauma informed response for over 25 years. Welcome, Thecia.
Thank you, Sadaf. Good to be here.
So, Thecia, you have a wealth of knowledge, and domestic violence is so prevalent in all our communities. But we hardly ever get a chance to talk about the silent victims, the children, because the children are hurt regardless. Both parents are so important to them, and when they see, when they see these kind of abusive dynamics happening in their home, it takes away their sense of safety. Can you tell us a little bit about children and domestic violence?
Definitely. And I'll actually start with the story. I love the art of storytelling. I was speaking at a local college about 4 years ago. It was pre-COVID. And it was to a group of seniors and seniors over 55 like myself. And at the end of the talk, a woman came up to me who had to have been in her late 60s. And she said, I really enjoyed the presentation, and I think it's just a blessing that people are talking more about this issue.
Mm-hmm.
She said, however, the only thing I didn't like is that you didn't talk about the children.
Mm.
And I said, so tell me more. She said, well, I grew up in a home where there was domestic violence. And I remember growing up, and she said, I actually lost my mother to domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And she recalled the day that her mother was killed by her father. And she shared that my life and my brother's life have never been the same. She then went on to share that her brother had died by suicide about a month earlier, and how he had been in and out of prison, in and out of rehab. She herself had also experienced going through rehab. And she just said there was nobody back then to help us to process what had happened to our mother.
I know.
And she said, please, whenever you have an opportunity to speak, and she goes, I know that sometimes there's not enough time, if you just mention the children.
And that's so true. It's like we completely forget, right? It's the survivor, the victim. Of course, that's important. But I mean, these are victims that can't even speak up for themselves. And then this generational cycle of violence just continues, right? Because they follow the behavior that they see most of the time, unless there's intervention, correct?
Exactly. And it's those, so some people may be familiar. However, there is what we call adverse childhood experience.
Yes.
Adverse childhood experience. And what that looks at is when trauma enters our lives before the age of 18. And definitely this woman who shared with me at the end of that presentation, both she and her brother, I think, were under the age of 10. So it is those things that happen and that children witness that will have a long range effect on them, such as using drugs and alcohol to cope with that loss or to cope with the violence that is occurring in their lives. We know that issues like cancer and diabetes, because when you are experiencing trauma, the things that happen to us through our body,
our immune
system.
Yeah.
So there are so many long-term ramifications that people are walking around every single day, going back and forth to the doctor, people who are engaged with law enforcement because of impulsive behavior. All of those are a part of growing up in a home where there's violence.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we just try to brush it under the rug.
Exactly. And the reality is, when we think about children and domestic violence, is that there is a statistic that says that approximately 10 million 10 million children
Wow.
every year are witnessing violence in their home. And that can range from hearing verbal and emotional abuse. It could range from actually witnessing physical violence. It's growing up in a home where the person who is using violence is using economic abuse, so the children don't have access to something as simple as school supplies, right?
Yeah. And 10 million human beings that are suffering without intervention.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's 10 million children who will become tomorrow's adults.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. That's huge.
Yeah.
10 million. So, like, as you said, this kind of behavior shows up, in different ways, right? Whether it's drugs or alcohol, substance abuse, different coping mechanisms. In schools, we also see, kids acting out, and then come to find out when and if the teachers or the principal try to find out what happened instead of why it happened, then you realize that there's something behind it, right? But most of the time, nobody does that. Nobody really tries to figure out, hey, what happened?
Exactly. And I love when you say the phrase, what happened, when we talk about being trauma informed.
Yes.
The question goes from what's wrong with them to what happened. What is this child, what is this young person experiencing in their home that they're getting expelled from school, that they're in school suspension, or that they are bringing a weapon to school and killing their classmates.
Oh my God, that the gun violence.
Yes, definitely.
Probably has a lot to do with
there have been some studies that have shown that yes, there is a correlation. Does it mean that every child that brings a weapon to school is in a home where there is domestic violence? Absolutely not. However, there is some correlation, because what we know when it comes to working with clients who are have been referred to domestic violence high risk teams, is that when there is a gun in the home, that there is a higher likelihood of the survivor being killed. But the children are learning information from the person who is using violence. They're learning that if I wave a gun around, people will listen to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow. That's huge.
Yeah.
Wow. So what do you suggest, or what do you think that we as a community should do to try to not only help those that are already going through this, but also prevent future, children being affected by this kind of violence?
Well, so I am also a certified emotional intelligence practitioner. And what I often share in my leadership trainings and when I'm working also with teachers is talking about social emotional learning. So we're here in Houston, and I do know that there are some campuses that are part of HISD that are actually implementing social emotional learning.
So important.
And when we talk about emotional intelligence, that's helping individuals, whether they are young adults or adults, to be able to manage their emotions, being able to have a better sense of self-awareness, being able to manage their impulses, also being able to be optimistic. And those, I believe, are characteristics that can prevent violence in relationships. Because if I am a young person and I constantly hear my mother or my father, whomever is the survivor in that relationship, being told, you're stupid, you're ugly, nobody's going to want you, and I look just like my mom, I look just like my dad, the message I'm hearing is that I'm stupid, I'm ugly, who is going to want me? Which then possibly could set me up to be a survivor in a relationship as well, or the person who uses violence. Because here's the thing, if I'm learning that no one will ever want me, then that then has me to go more into power, into control, and say,
that's how bullying occurs.
Exactly. Right? And actually, when we look at the coercive control will and the characteristics of bullying, there is an overlap.
Absolutely. Because the bullies are the ones that are the most insecure, right?
Yes.
Wow. And I love that you brought up social emotional learning, because we've started going to schools and doing social emotional learning with middle school and high school. So we just did emotional regulation. And what we've noticed is that a lot of times these kids haven't seen what healthy behavior looks like to even be able to emulate it, right? They're only seeing what they see, and that's why they're following that. So I love that you brought this up, that primary prevention is just going in and showing them, what does emotional regulation look like? What does a healthy attitude, healthy behavior looks like, right? So that they have something else to follow.
Exactly. And, to add to what you shared about the normalization, that when we grow up, people grow up in homes where there is violence, it becomes normal.
Yeah.
Just probably 3 months ago, I was at a local college, and as I went through the coercive control wheel, someone said, well, that's just normal. It's just normal for your partner to call you out of your name. It's just normal for someone to stalk you if you decide to break up with them. And that is...
And now with social media,
yes,
everyone's stalking everyone.
And so it has become normal. Quote unquote, toxic behavior has become normal. In fact, our organization, HCDVC, just held a coordinated community response roundtable, coordinated community response to domestic violence in the Hispanic community. And some of the conversation that came out of that, someone was sharing that on Instagram or TikTok, one of the two, that there is this influencer who talks about toxica relationships. And so they're kind of putting a spin on, she keyed my car. And so basically, she keyed my car because she loves me so much.
Oh.
No, that's not okay. And so that type of behavior is now being glamorized.
It's scary. Yeah. That is so scary. You're absolutely right. I mean, now that I think about it, it's so normal to have share locations with people. Like, oh, like my daughter has all her friends' locations. So even if like your boyfriend has it, it's not a big deal. He knows where you are at all times. I mean, that can develop into toxicity, right? Like it's so scary. And in our culture, what you said, a lot of it is normalized, right? It's just, it's okay. Like the mom, will be like, maybe it's not the same with younger kids, but like my generation, oh, it's okay. He just hit you once. Or at least he's not physically abusive. He can like say whatever he wants to you, but stay in your home because he's not hitting you. You're lucky.
And the other part of that is, so many times we teach children that, or we teach people in general, that abuse is only physical. That if someone is calling you names, I can remember growing up, and of course, again, I'm 58 years old, so a long time since I've been a child, but I remember growing up, and there was a young man, I think, had a crush on me. And so he would tease me, he would pull my hair, he would pull my clothes, and what was the response of the adults? Oh, he just likes you.
Yeah.
Well, that's not healthy.
Yeah.
That's not healthy. However, how many times do we hear that? How many times do we teach our daughters and our sons that teasing behavior is a form of endearment?
Yeah. And you're so right. Like, I mean, when we look at these children, even the whole man box that Tony Robbins talks about, right? It's so true. Like, they're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to show their emotions as little kids, right? So it's just like, even a little boy that's crying, the dad or mom will be like, you stop crying. To the girl, they'll hug her, right? They'll make her feel like it's okay, but they'll be like, boys don't cry, or you're a big boy. So automatically they're learning to stifle their emotions, which, can result in anything from abusive behavior to, self-esteem issues and all of this stuff. Oh, wow. We really went on a tangent, but all of this is related, right? Because it all has to do with children being affected by the way their parents are treating them.
Exactly.
Or by what they're seeing in their home, whether it's, boys don't cry, or whether it's, the dad or the mom talking abusively to each other. They're learning it. They're mirroring it. And this is what they become. So, I mean, I know that you said social emotional learning. Anything else that can be used to break this generational cycle of violence?
But along that same vein of social emotional learning as a form of primary prevention, I think at the end of the day, it is how people feel about themselves. And what I have found in talking to both men and women who use violence in their relationships as a form of power and control is that so many times they don't like the person in the mirror. And I believe...
Epiphany.
Because how can you call someone out of their name that you love? How can you force someone that you love to drop out of school and not pursue their dream and love yourself? I think so much of it, and I was just recently at a summit, Futures Without Violence, a national organization. They brought together BIPOC leaders in the movement to share. And that's one of the things that came up, was that It's about love. And as quote unquote corny as that sounds, that if I don't love Thecia, then how can I love Sadat?
That's
I
true.
can't give you what I don't have.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah. So I have to be able to look in the mirror and no matter what I see, say, girl, you all right. Because if I can't say I'm all right in the mirror, then I'm going to find everything in you or my partner that is wrong in
my
order to
God.
help me to feel better.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge. So the number one thing to help with all of these things is love yourself.
Exactly.
Right? Become self-aware of who you are and learn to love that person. And if you don't like what you see, then change. Right?
And it's hard to love myself, as one young man shared about his guilt of watching his mother be beaten. He said, I was 7 years old. There was nothing I could do. And he goes, I've never been able to forgive myself. And he went on to share that he's never been in a true relationship. Because he goes, I'm not sure I know how to be in one. Because he failed, quote unquote, to protect his mother. That wasn't his job to protect his mother, but what was instilled in him is that maybe he wasn't man enough. Because at the age of 7, he couldn't stop this love.
Oh gosh. Yeah. And that's more common than you think, than the regular public thinks. But it's just it's so sad because I feel like children that grow up in these homes, they lose their sense of safety. And safety is so important for somebody to grow, to understand themselves, to understand relationships, to thrive. You need to have a safe space, right? So if that safe space is gone and you're in constant fear because you don't know what's going to happen, and the way a child perceives things, a lot of times they think it's their fault. Like the 7-year-old was like, I couldn't protect her, right? So you think that somehow you're responsible. So imagine like you're growing up in fear with feeling responsibility, feeling that you haven't lived up to an expectation of helping, the victim get out of things. I mean, how can that person grow up to be normal, like to grow up to be thriving? There's going to be stunts. There's going to be issues with their self-esteem. And if they don't, like you said, if they don't love themselves, how can they love someone else? Oh my God. That's profound. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else that you would like to tell our audience or before we end the program?
I think it's so important that we are willing to invest in the next generation. So as educators, becoming domestic violence informed so that you're able to recognize, respond, and refer those families who may be experiencing violence. Pediatricians.
Huge.
I had a pediatrician that I worked with probably almost 20 years ago. She came to a domestic violence training at the end. She goes, oh my heavens. She goes, I never thought about domestic violence as a pediatric issue. And to this day, she now has integrated that into her practice to do screening for domestic violence. Because so many times, some of the issues that children are having, children who are constantly saying, my tummy hurts, or things of that nature, that those are all trauma responses, that their tummy hurts because of what maybe they heard the night before. So as healthcare providers, again, being domestic violence informed, so not only for the adult survivor in that relationship, but also for the child survivors in that relationship, to be able to pick up on some clues that this may be a family that is experiencing violence. For those in the faith-based community, those who work with children as part of their faith-based community, again, being domestic violence informed. And that is the great work that your organization, An-Nisa, is doing, going out into the community to help people to become domestic violence informed so that they can pick up on those subtle cues.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I don't know if you know, thank you for mentioning that, but we, Dr. Hamdan has a training on neurobiology of trauma, and we do neurobiology of trauma. We do it with doctors, we do it with prosecutors, with judges, like making them understand what different trauma responses show up, right, in these children, in these people, so that, because we do have, when you go to the doctor's office, there is that DV screening or whatever, but that doesn't even begin to help you understand what trauma is, right? What it can be. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. It was very informative, and I always love having you here, Thecia.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.